we can then go from there. So we are ready to get started. Let's get started now. So welcome everyone to SAVE's Miami-Dade County State Attorney Candidate Forum. My name is Orlando Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of Safeguarding American Values for Everyone, known as SAVE. My pronouns are he, him, and his. SAVE's mission is to promote, protect, and defend equality for people in South Florida who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Certainly, I want to take a little moment to celebrate and also acknowledge this week's Supreme Court ruling. It is a huge victory for us, which still means that we have a lot of work to be done in many areas of being able to achieve equality. So I do want to pause and recognize that 100%. So today is our first state attorney candidate forum. Both candidates that are running for the office accepted the invitation to be part of the forum. Miami-Dade County includes a population of nearly 3 million residents, of which half are registered to vote. We're excited to put together these sessions to help members of the community learn more about each of the individuals. Our hope is to be able to support your ability to be able to make an informed decision when you go to vote. The election for the Miami-Dade State Attorney is on August the 18th. In addition to the forums that we are hosting, the SAVE Action Pack will invite both candidates to participate in our endorsement process. The candidates who wish to receive an endorsement will respond to the questionnaire, where they'll be able to share with us their policy positions on various issues that affect the LGBT community. Following the completion of the questionnaire, each candidate will then be interviewed by a panel comprised of members of the community who will vote to endorse a candidate or not. SAVE's work is primarily supported by individual donors, corporate sponsors, and philanthropic grants. I urge you to become a member at save.lgbt/membership. Memberships are available for as low as $35. So today's forum will include a 15-minute presentation by Miami State Attorney candidate Melba Pearson. Following the presentation, we will take questions from the public. Please know that all the attendees in this webinar are muted except for the presenters. We'll take live questions if you post them to the Q&A function in the toolbar of Zoom. I advise you to please be very succinct in submitting your questions. If you have joined by Facebook and you want to be able to participate and submit questions, you'll have to do that via Zoom. Joining me for the Q&A session today is Sergio Molina. He's a SAVE volunteer and a third-year law student at Nova Southeastern University's Shepherd Broad College of Law. It's exciting to have Sergio with us because one of the things that we do at SAVE is focus on leadership development. So getting volunteers involved and really getting them, giving them the opportunity to be able to be deeply involved in our processes. Welcome, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Molina. Let's get started. So, Ms. Pearson, thank you for being with us tonight. I hope that you and your family are all doing well. We're going to hand the floor over to you for 15 minutes, and Sergio and I will go off camera. We will come back on camera when there are just 3 minutes left, so that will be your 3-minute warning when you see our cameras come back on. So for now, we're going to turn it over to you, and you will have 15 minutes, and we will go off camera. So the floor is yours for 15 minutes for your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Orlando, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Melba Pearson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am running to be the next state attorney of Miami-Dade County. First off, I want to acknowledge that this month is Pride Month, so happy Pride, and also do want to uplift the Supreme Court decision this week, which was amazing, and I do echo the sentiments that we do have further to go, but this is definitely a good first step in making sure that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and family members and everyone who is in that family group is able to work without harassment and without discrimination. So definitely very thrilled about seeing those results this week. So a little bit about me. I am a former prosecutor. I was a prosecutor here in Miami-Dade County for close to 16 years. And then I spent 3 years as deputy director of the ACLU of Florida. Part of my work at the ACLU included working on Amendment 4, which returned voting rights to people with criminal convictions. I worked on immigration, so that intersection between immigration, criminal law, and folks being returned unjustly to home countries that they may not know anything about as a result of the Muslim ban and other actions taken by this current presidential administration. I also worked on criminal justice reform as well as police practices. And lastly, I did work with our legal team with regards to the Cohen case, which was about making sure that folks who identify as transgender are able to get the medications and the assistance they need while in custody in the prison system. So those are some of the highlights of my time at the ACLU of Florida. Going back to my prosecutorial experience for a moment, during those 16 years, I tried countless trials, everything from auto theft all the way up to double homicides. I've held mothers as they wept after they lost their loved ones. I've tried very complicated cases, including stand your ground cases, and trial is something that I really enjoy doing, as well as supervising. I supervised the younger attorneys, teaching them how to build their cases and how to be able to navigate the criminal justice system and the courtroom effectively. So that's a little bit about that aspect of my career. I also served as president of the National Black Prosecutors Association for 2 terms, where I was able to travel the country and really explore what criminal justice can look like across the country and look at some of the other jurisdictions that are really doing criminal justice reform well. So I've been able to take from that experience, and I'm really looking forward to being able to implement some of those techniques and some of those ideas here in Miami-Dade County. And I'm also the past president of the Gwen S. Cherry Black Women Lawyers Association, where I was the president for a year and have been on the board for about close to 10 years at this juncture. So just to talk a little bit about the platform that I'm running on, I have 4 key pillars. The first is that of bail reform. I want to end the use of cash bail, which is the process by which, if you are arrested, you need to pay a certain amount of money to be able to get your freedom in advance of your trial or taking a plea or resolving your case. That, unfortunately, creates 2 systems of justice: a system for those who are wealthy and can afford to bond out, and one for those who don't have as much resources and aren't able to get their freedom. So I want to end the use of cash bail for non-violent offenses and for people who do not pose a risk to the community. And by doing so, this is going to increase and make our community safer in the following way. I intend to do this in conjunction with programming so that while a person is out on release, they're able to work on the drivers that got them into the criminal justice system to begin with. The reason why that's so important is that too many times in the criminal justice system, we are quick to warehouse people, put them in prison, and just sort of like kick the can down the road. But if we're not addressing the underlying issues, once the person gets out of jail or gets out of prison or is released from supervision, the issues are still there. And then they're more likely to commit a new crime. That does not make sense, and that does not make our communities a safe place to be. So that's why I want to end the use of cash bail for non-violent offenses for people who do not pose a risk to the community. The second aspect of my platform is that of juvenile justice and making sure that kids are treated as kids. We've had a huge body of studies over the course of the last 10 years that really show that the human brain does not fully develop until the age of 25 or 26. As such, kids should remain in the juvenile system because of the fact their decision-making process is very different than that of an adult. Unfortunately, Florida is one of the states that has this horrible practice of what's called direct file. It takes kids out of the juvenile system and places them into the adult system. The problem with that is that the kids aren't getting the kind of services that they need, and they're not being treated the way they should be treated as kids. So I intend to end that practice with the exception of if a child commits homicide or murder, or commits, let's say, an armed robbery with a firearm where the firearm was discharged and somebody was injured. Those types of serious and very violent cases, I would explore sending those to the adult system. But the vast majority of cases can be handled within the juvenile system, and that's strictly within the discretion of the elected prosecutor. So that is another aspect that I intend to change the day that I take office. The third part of my platform is holding corrupt elected officials and police officers that choose to harm our community accountable in a court of law. My opponent has not once in her 27 years in office charged a police officer for an on-duty killing. Not one. That's unacceptable, and that's not justice. As we, as a nation, as even globally, as we see protests around excessive force, not only happening here, but in France, in Australia, and New Zealand, so many in London, so many people are raising their voices around accountability and wanting to see bad police officers be held accountable for their actions. The incumbent is choosing not to do so. So we need to really look at what we're doing as a community around holding officers and corrupt elected officials accountable. To that end, I intend to create a civil rights unit. Within that unit, I'm going to have dedicated prosecutors that are solely going to work on police shootings and police misconduct. The reason is, the way it's designed right now, the prosecutors who handle police shootings, and I was one when I was in the office, you have another full assignment. You may be in the domestic crimes unit. You may be a prosecutor in front of a particular judge. You have all of your cases, and then on top of that, you're handling police shooting cases. To me, these types of cases require so much more attention and so much more expertise. And I think the best way to go about that is to have dedicated people working on those issues. Continuing on the civil rights unit, before I go to the fourth part of my platform, the civil rights unit will also have dedicated hate crimes prosecutors. The way hate crimes are handled in the state attorney's office at present, which is another aspect of my work when I was a prosecutor, I was part of the hate crimes task force. The way it's currently handled is that, again, you have a full assignment of other cases, and then on occasion you take a hate crime. To me, that is not the best way to approach this. You need to have dedicated hate crimes prosecutors who, because that's all that they do day in and day out, they're very quick to be able to spot the issues, spot the problems in certain cases, and have a different level of sensitivity when it comes to these kinds of cases. When my hate crimes prosecutors are not in the courtroom, they are going to be out in the community. They're going to be reaching out to various impacted and marginalized communities to make sure that they know their rights. They know what constitutes a hate crime, because so many times, and being a woman of color, being an African-American woman, I've dealt with issues that were hateful in nature. The question is whether or not it rises to a crime. And sometimes we just dismiss things because it's just easier that way. I want to make sure that people understand that if certain things happen to them, it is a crime, and that the person who did it to them can be held accountable. So I want to make sure that my hate crimes prosecutors explain the process, walk folks through what they can expect, and then at that point, people are empowered with the knowledge to be able to make a decision to either report something that happened to them or provide support to someone who has been a victim. And I especially want to make sure that I'm reaching out to our transgender community, because as we look at the case of Tony McDade and so many other folks who have been murdered just because of who they were, that to me is unconscionable and unacceptable. And my administration will make a very bright line in the sand that this type of behavior will not be tolerated, and we will go after it aggressively. The last part of my civil rights unit will include a conviction integrity unit, so that we can look back at old cases and see whether or not there was an injustice occurred. Do we have a police officer that has now been revealed has been lying in their testimony, and there may have been convictions based on false testimony? we have to investigate that and undo past wrongs. I'm going to make sure that the public is able to give information on past cases if an issue comes to their attention. The example I like to give is that of a dying declaration, sort of like that deathbed confession, when you have, let's say, your uncle was involved in something 20 years ago, he's now passing away and he admits that, listen, I was involved in this particular crime. Somebody else may have been convicted and is now in prison as a result of this crime. That information needs to get to law enforcement and it needs to get to the prosecutor's office to be able to undo this past wrong. So I want to make sure that there is a place on the website so that the public can go and give that sort of information. It gets routed to my conviction integrity prosecutors, and then they can take that information and launch an investigation and potentially free people and exonerate people who have been wrongfully convicted. The last part of my platform is that of transparency. So as I mentioned earlier, I was the deputy director for the ACLU of Florida. The ACLU issued a study back in 2017 called Unequal Treatment. And it did a deep dive on the data within Miami-Dade County, looking at the rates of arrest, the length of sentence, the types of charges that were filed, all of the different components of the criminal justice system in Miami-Dade County. And what that study revealed is that Black Miamians get almost up to 3 times worse outcomes than white Miamians at every single stage of the criminal justice system. If you're a Black Hispanic Miamian, that number goes up to 6 times as worse outcomes. That's unacceptable. So what I intend to do is, number one, replicate that study and use data from 2018 to 2020. The study that was done by the ACLU covered 2010 to 2015. I'm going to take that data and then make policy decisions based on that data to make sure that I'm moving forward equity and equality in this county. And then I will release a regular report card to the voters so that they can hold me accountable as to whether or not I'm making things better or worse for the people of Miami-Dade County. I want to make sure that the people of the county are empowered with information, not only to hold me accountable, but to hold all of the actors in the criminal justice system accountable for their actions and making sure that we're pushing justice forward. So with that, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. I'm going to have to stop it. You were just a minute shy, so good use of time. So this is our Q&A session. I really appreciate you providing your opening statements, sharing with us the pillars of your campaign and the thinking. In order for us to be able to get started, I want to remind members of the audience that we're taking your questions at this time. Please go ahead and use the Zoom toolbar in the Q&A bubbles that appear on there. Submit your questions, be very succinct. And for us to get started, we have Sergio Molina, and he's going to offer the first question, and then I'm going to go through some of the public questions, and we'll follow on from there.
Thank you, Orlando. Good evening, Ms. Pearson. My name is Sergio Molina. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Our audience is looking forward to an informative discussion this evening, so I'm going to jump right in. As we've already mentioned, just 2 days ago, we witnessed the latest victory in the LGBTQ rights movement, a movement that historians recognize as having ties that bound it to the Black freedom movement. Given the intersectional history of the LGBTQ community, addressing systemic racism and racial disparities is indivisibly part of our battle for equal rights. Ms. Pearson, you've recently indicated that prosecuting police misconduct is essential to sending a message of accountability to the police force, particularly through your Civil Rights Division and Integrity Office. Can you tell us about what that plan for holding the police force accountable looks like in practice, and how that might impact the public's trust in your office?
Certainly. So thank you for that. So in practice, it would be, number one, making sure that I have dedicated prosecutors that work on this issue, right? So that way they're giving their undivided attention with regard to these cases. Then the goal would be, because of the fact that they can focus on these cases, we can make sure to resolve these cases, whether it be by clearing the officer because there was no wrongdoing, or if there was in fact wrongdoing, filing charges in a quicker manner. At present, sometimes these cases linger for 5 years, which is completely unacceptable. That's not justice. I want to see these cases resolved within 6 months with limited exceptions. So then at the 6-month mark, hopefully there's either charges filed or the officer is cleared. When charges are filed, these are going to be the prosecutors that are going to take it all the way to trial. I know that there has been some concern in the public sphere as to whether or not these cases are winnable, but the standard of proof is not whether or not we can win. Because if that was the case, the majority of cases that get filed in this county would not be filed. The standard is whether or not there is enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Just because a jury may disagree with your evidence doesn't mean that the case shouldn't be filed. So I'm going to make sure that in those types of cases, we are putting forth our best evidence and that we are not afraid to charge these cases. Sometimes you have to be creative. Maybe the level of charge may not be, even though it was, let's say, an on-duty killing, maybe it's not a murder charge. Maybe it's a manslaughter charge. Maybe it's a culpable negligence charge. Maybe it's an aggravated assault. We may have to think outside of the box, but it is imperative to make sure that we are making these steps and being transparent with the public so that they understand how these cases are built and also that we are taking it seriously. And then the last aspect in practice is going to be working with the police department. And I know that sounds like, wait a minute, you're going to prosecute the police, but also work with them. Listen, they're an important stakeholder when it comes to the criminal justice system. So I'm not looking to cut them out of the scenario at all. But I want to make sure that they are getting proper training, especially as I lay forth my priorities. And I will be prioritizing serious crimes such as your sexual assaults, your homicides, those gun crimes, all of that, and moving away from certain crimes that, again, could be sent to diversion. Someone could be given a civil citation, maybe pay a fine rather than do jail time. But as I move forward and send forth these policies, I'm going to make sure that my prosecutors are doing trainings for the officers so that they are up to date on what charges I'm going to be filing on different cases and what I'm not going to be prioritizing. So that way that limits the interactions they're having with the public unnecessarily, which are situations that can escalate into a situation where you have excessive force or, unfortunately, death. So it's going to take working with the police department as well as also being very aggressive about these cases. The last point I want to make is that I have been in discussions with neighboring counties with regards to swapping each other's police shootings, because there is an impression that, well, because of the fact that you rely on these departments to be able to bring forth your prosecutions, you're not going to be able to be fair and impartial when it comes to prosecuting these types of police cases. Well, if I'm handling, and my office is handling the prosecution of police officers that are from Broward County, that argument can't be made. So I think that's another way to build that trust with the community so they can see that we're being transparent and we're centering their needs most of all.
Thanks for that. We have a lot of questions that are coming through, so I just want to thank everybody that has joined SAVE's State Attorney forum today. It's a wonderful opportunity to see so many people with us. We've got about 38 participants, a lot of questions that have come through the pipeline, including researchers who study hate crimes in the LGBT community. And here's one of the questions. According to the Florida Attorney General's most recent report, there were only 17 hate crimes against LGBT individuals in Miami in 2018. Do you think that this reflects the reality? What would you do to better identify hate crimes and bring the offenders to justice?
So I don't think that that's an accurate number. I think that, number one, you have the issue of, first off, people not reporting some of these crimes because of either fear or maybe they just don't understand the system. And the fear could be fear of retaliation or just fear because maybe you're undocumented or maybe you're worried that you might be misgendered, or, you know, there could be a number of things that prevent people from filing. So I think that that number is is under, right? I think it's much more than that. And secondly, I think it's a matter of making sure that people are educated about the process, which is why it's so important for my hate crimes prosecutors to be out in the community educating folks on what their options are, because people then may feel more comfortable with reporting once they know that there's a liaison or somebody who understands or is sensitive to their needs. And the last aspect is it's just basically that when it comes to the hate crimes, having a prosecutor that is dedicated to these issues means that they're better at issue spotting. So sometimes you may have an arrest affidavit that comes into the office and, you know, people just look at it on his face and it looks like a robbery or whatever the case may be, and they move on. They may miss some of the underlying symptoms that could show that this is a hate crime. And, you know, again, it's not your fault because you don't know what you don't know. So having my hate crimes prosecutors review all of the arrest forms when they come in on a daily basis to, you know, basically scan them and see if there's a hate crime component, I think that would improve those numbers. And then the last portion of it is when you have prosecutors who are handling these cases and they talk to the victim or survivor and they're like, this seems like a hate crime, at least there is somebody they can liaison with and or refer the case to and say, listen, why don't you take this case or take a look at it and let me know if I'm missing something. So I think that's a way to better improve those outcomes.
Great. Sergio?
Hello again. So you had mentioned working with the police force a little earlier on and having a symbiotic relationship. Will these accountability initiatives impact police officers' willingness to cooperate in your prosecution of civilian on civilian crime?
I should hope not, because at the end of the day, my goal is not to conduct a witch hunt on anyone, right? I'm not looking to find innocent people and jam them up. That to me is the complete opposite of justice. And that's against everything I stand for. But if you do something wrong, you need to be held accountable. What accountability looks like can vary based on the circumstance, based on the crime, based on your history, all of that. So if the police department say they want to root out the bad apples, if they say this is not reflective of who we are as a body, then we should be able to work together if that is truly how they feel. Now, if something else ends up being the truth, then we deal with it accordingly. But I don't intend to ever back away from doing what is right and holding people accountable for wrongdoing, whether you wear a badge or whether you're a civilian.
Thanks for that. The next question also comes from our audience. It says, if cases are closed at the 6-month mark, what happens if you don't have sufficient evidence to charge because you're still investigating? You exonerate the officer.
So the 6-month is a goal. But if there are situations where you get to the 6-month mark and there's still investigation left or there's still outstanding pieces of evidence, then obviously the case has to continue until you have all the evidence. But I don't see it being acceptable that we're waiting 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. At the 6-month mark, you take a review of what is missing and who is in possession of said evidence, and then you make sure to put the pressure on. Is it a matter of, I need to involve the courts and have a judge issue an order and say, listen, if you don't provide this information by X date, you're going to be in contempt of court. That is one tool that you can use to help move things along. And again, what other evidence are we looking for? You know, so it's just making sure that we have everything we need and we use every tool that's available to us to make sure that we go out of our way to find what is necessary, apply pressure if needed, but I'm going to make sure that all the police departments know, listen, we're trying to get this done in 6 months. So by month 5, if you see that there's a problem, come talk to us about it. Don't wait till the deadline passes and then say, oops, you know. So I'd rather not have to use the hammer, but if I have to, I will.
Thank you. Thanks for the visual too, right?
Yeah.
Sergio.
Ms. Pearson, expanding on our discussion of systemic disparities, I'd like to turn to laws that disparately impact members of the LGBTQ community, such as HIV criminalization statutes and the LGBTQ panic defense, to name a few. For those in the audience that may not be aware, when a defendant asserts that the LGBTQ panic defense is what they choose to claim, they are effectively suggesting, as a defense to their crime, that the victim's sexual orientation or gender identity provoked their attack on that LGBTQ victim. On the other hand, HIV criminalization laws impose criminal liability for legal conduct or increase the penalties for illegal conduct based on a person's HIV positive status, even in situations where there is no actual transmission or even the possibility of a transmission. Most HIV criminalization statutes require HIV positive people to disclose their HIV status to their partners before having any kind of sex, but proving disclosure can be tough. These cases often unfairly and unjustly boil down to one person's word against the other. This ultimately leads to disparities, diagnoses that sometimes do not occur because people don't want to get tested, and perpetuates a stigma. But most notably, empirical data suggests that these HIV criminalization statutes disproportionately impact the Black community. That said, what do you think the role of the state attorney is in confronting laws that discriminate against the LGBTQ community, and whether it's your job to enforce such laws regardless of their detrimental impacts on the LGBTQ community?
So my viewpoint is that, first of all, a prosecutor's job is to uphold the law. So we'll start with that. But at the same token, a prosecutor has wide discretion in what should be prioritized and how cases should be handled. So I personally disagree with HIV criminalization laws because, again, it criminalizes consensual behavior. It causes more problems than it actually solves. If the goal is for people to get tested and to be able to have open and honest discussions about their status, that statute is not going to get us there. So I would use my platform as state attorney to advocate for the repeal of such laws. And that's something that I had started working on at the ACLU of Florida as well. So I do have some familiarity about that coming into this. The gay panic defense, as far as I'm concerned, is just ridiculousness. It's just ridiculous, right? So just anybody comes with that, it's just get out of here with that mess because that's just foolishness. And I don't even think it's really like a legally recognized defense per se. I think it's used, but it's not like self-defense that's actually codified. So somebody saying that is like, no, you've just showed how, you told on yourself, you just showed how hateful you are. So now that causes us to kind of think through, is depending on the situation, is there a hate crime enhancement that needs to happen here if that hasn't happened already? Because again, sometimes that sort of dialogue happens closer to trial. Usually the quote unquote gay panic defense doesn't happen at the time that you're filing charges or a time of arrest. It comes out later. So if that's the case, then maybe we need to adjust the charges to reflect that this may have been more of a hateful intent than it was just an incident between two people that may have been criminal in nature. So that's, for me, the role of a prosecutor is to make sure to use your platform to fight for justice. Sometimes that comes in the courtroom. Sometimes that's in Tallahassee. Sometimes that's in the court of public opinion. But you use whatever you can to make sure that you're advancing equity and equality for all people in your county. And that's what I would aim to do as state attorney. And my track record shows that up until this point. That's something that's centered my work as an attorney for the last 20-something years.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to jump over to a couple of questions here. We do have a good stream of questions that are coming through. So the next one reads that there are statistics that show that police arrest people within 1 hour before the end of their shift. Because they're arresting someone, this provides them with the opportunity to work overtime and collect time and a half. What can be done to be able to consider this in criminal cases?
Yeah, unfortunately, not much, because of the fact that that prosecutors don't have control over how police officers are paid or shift work or anything like that. It's something that can be discouraged. It's a discussion that can be had, elected prosecutor to chief of police, but I don't think that that's necessarily going to change anything unless there's legislation from Tallahassee to say, to discourage that practice. But also at the end of the day, if you have a situation where you just literally found somebody towards the end of your shift, because I've also heard officers do the opposite, like, it's the end of my shift, I want to go home, I don't necessarily want to make an arrest because I'm going to have to stay for another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and my partner's home, I want to be with my family, whatever the case may be. So I think it's something that can be discouraged, but unfortunately it's not something that's within the direct purview of the state attorney. But I'm happy to use my platform to continue to raise awareness around these types of issues and discourage sort of like that milking of the system, right?
Sure, and I'm going to build on that a little bit. So I think that you mentioned the Florida legislature, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts about the role that you will play in, forming and advocating for legislation to be passed. In particular, the Florida hate crime statute doesn't cover gender identity, which means that transgender victims don't receive the extra protection that they need. What would you do as a state attorney to change this? So I'm asking you a very specific question, but also a global one about your role in advocacy.
So as a state attorney, I will be traveling to Tallahassee myself on a regular basis to, number one, advocate around different laws that I think would be positive for criminal justice reform, and to advance equity. So that's something I'd be doing just generally. When it comes to the Florida hate crime statute, I have been very active with regards to expanding the definitions that are currently existing in the statute. I believe that gender identity should be included, and I will continue to use my platform as the state attorney to fight for this change, because I think it's past due, and I think that it's going to do so much more to help our people here in Miami-Dade County and throughout the state, but definitely here in our county. So for me, being a prosecutor is about using your knowledge and expertise to educate lawmakers around the intended as well as the unintended consequences of some pieces of legislation. It's something I did when I was deputy director at the ACLU of Florida, when it came to different charges like increasing the threshold for grand theft, for instance. Some time ago, it was $300. Maybe it was like 2 years ago or a year or two ago when the statute changed. But before, it was $300. If you stole something that was $300 or more, you would be charged with a felony. Now, that'd be one thing in the 80s, but right now you go to Nordstrom's or wherever, you get a pair of True Religion jeans, that's $300. So you steal it, that's a felony, right? So that number did not keep up with inflation and the times. So we were advocating for the number to be raised to $1,500, which was more in line with what some of the surrounding states were doing. We weren't fully successful. We got it raised to $750, but that's still way better than where we were. So that's an example of the type of advocacy that I've done in the past, and I've done it as president of the National Black Prosecutors Association when we looked at criminal justice reform and sort of like how we can change our federal statutes and minimum mandatories to basically stop criminalizing whole groups of people. So it's something I'm very comfortable with, very familiar with, and I enjoy doing, and I really look forward to doing more of that when I become state attorney of Miami-Dade County.
Thank you, Sergio.
Staying within the issue of hate crimes, I'd like to focus in on violence against members of the trans community, as we've just mentioned. Trans people today face an epidemic of anti-trans violence. This is a far more prevalent experience for Black and brown trans individuals. In fact, in 2019, the United States saw at least 26 deaths of transgender or gender nonconforming people due to fatal violence. And 2020 has already seen at least 16. A number that has had to be updated at least 3 times just this week. As a public official that would represent one of Florida's most diverse counties, what would you do to make yourself available to members of the trans community who might be fearful of interacting with law enforcement and the criminal justice system?
So I'm very sensitive to that issue. I know that in the last week we had 2 African-American trans women that were murdered, one in Ohio, I believe, and one in Pennsylvania. I believe one was actually protesting as part of Black Lives Matter March and was brutalized, and my heart is just broken over that. So how I would approach it is my hate crimes prosecutors will be making specific outreach, like I said, to a number of marginalized communities, but especially the LGBT community, and more especially the trans community, so that they understand the process and it can kind of demystify some of the fears that are involved. I also want to create a liaison between the LGBTQ community, Q+ community, and my office to make sure that we're examining any trends or concerns that are happening not only in the county, but nationwide. Because I want to make sure I'm being proactive in addressing issues rather than reactive, waiting for a wave of things to happen here, and then like, okay, well, now we'll take a policy position. I want to make sure that we create policies and protocols and put them in place so that people are protected and they don't have to be victimized before we respond and do something. So I intend to have very robust outreach to the trans community, no matter whether you're in, I know there's a lot of concern, especially as we have trans folks who engage in sex work, and they are a little afraid of interacting with law enforcement because of that. I want to make it abundantly clear. I'm going to say it on this forum, I've said it in other forums, and I'm going to keep saying it. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your walk is or what your life experience is. If you've been victimized, I am here to protect you. And I am here to fight for you. Whether you're undocumented, whether you're trans, no matter your pronouns, you are a person, you matter, and I will fight for you till my last breath. That's how I've lived my life as an attorney, and that's how I intend to lead as the top prosecutor in this county. And that is how I will train and recruit my prosecutors, for them to be very sensitive about these issues and to fight alongside me on behalf of the people of Miami-Dade County. And the last aspect that I want to touch on, even though this wasn't really the question, but I want to touch on it. During my time, my 16 years as a prosecutor, I never worked alongside anyone who was non-gender conforming or identified as trans or two-spirit or anything like that. Like I didn't have that robust base of knowledge from my job. I knew it from friends, and I have a lot of close friends, and so who've taught me about those things. And then working at the ACLU of Florida, I got a much deeper base and got to really interact with folks I never had the opportunity to do so before, because that's just that was just life, right? Like I just didn't interact with with a variety of folks from the trans community. And so now, like that now that my eyes have been opened and now I'm a little bit more attuned, I know that I have more to learn, but I want to be very intentional about recruiting more attorneys who identify outside of the traditional binary, she and him pronouns, right? Because again, that representation is important. When I, as an African-American woman, walk into a room and let's say it's a panel discussion and I see someone who looks like me on the panel, it makes me feel good because I feel represented. I want everyone to have that same experience when they look at my office and they see that they are represented in my staff and in my leadership, not just, okay, I have one, and I'm not besmirching anybody's role in the office, but like, okay, I have one secretary and okay, check, right? No, I want people who are at the table, at the decision-making table, who can center these concerns. If we have a blind spot, if we're missing something, flag it for us, and let's make sure we're making policy decisions that are inclusive and that are helping everyone.
I appreciate you highlighting really sort of the humane, the very sort of nature of us evolving when we're getting to know people that are not familiar. And it's always what we think about when we think about allyship, right? Not everybody knows everything right off the bat. So thanks for that. The next question is, what's the role of data and research in improving prosecutorial performance? Prosecutors apparently don't like data, and therefore the field has not benefited from data and research for years. How specifically would you change this outdated approach to prosecution?
So I think I think the reason why prosecutors don't like data is because we just don't like math. So it is that, I always joke that I became an attorney because I can't do math, right? If I could, I'd be like an accountant or something. But anyway, be that as it may, I see the value in data because the data doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. So when you see those numbers, you can then say, what we're doing isn't working, or what we're doing is working, let's do more of that. So as I had mentioned about the ACLU study around unequal treatment, that data explored a period of time from 2010 to 2015, and it revealed a whole host of problems, right? So you can't just stick your head in the sand and pretend that it's not out there. It's there. So let's embrace it and let's be like, okay, what can we do differently so that we can have better outcomes? Unfortunately, I was part of the leadership team that presented the issues that came from this report to my opponent, and she just basically dismissed it and was like, yeah, there's got to be other reasons for the numbers to be what they are. That's not accurate. You guys didn't, it wasn't done right. And these were two researchers out of the University of Miami. Like that's their bread and butter. That's what they do. So they created, all the protocols and what they have to control for and all of that. So at the end of the day, I'm not the one that's going to be doing the data research, right? Because that's not my thing, right? But I'm going to find the people who do that all the time, and they're really good at it. And I'm going to rely on what the experts say because they're good at what they do. And also, there has been an increase in studies and using data and statistics in the field of prosecution, but not by prosecutors, by think tanks and other organizations like your Center for Court Innovation, your Justice Collaborative, your Arnold Foundation. All of those folks have great data and great protocols that they have set forth to be like, okay, if you want your office to be more progressive, these are some of the things you can do. So I already have relationships with all of those groups, and I'm going to be bringing them in to help me tweak my systems to make them more effective, more data-driven, and making sure that we're getting the best outcomes for the people of the county.
So staying on the issue of data and victim accounting, too often violence against trans individuals goes unreported or misreported due to misgendering or dead naming. This makes accurate accounting of anti-trans violence incredibly difficult. For those in the audience who might not be aware, misgendering occurs when a trans individual is referred to by a gender other than the one that they identify with. And dead naming occurs when a trans individual is not referred to by their new affirmed name. Ms. Pearson, if elected, is there anything that you can do to prevent the misgendering and dead naming of the trans individuals that interact with the criminal justice system?
Yes, so part of my plan is to, I mentioned before, doing training with the different law enforcement departments. I would be seeking to partner with SAVE and other organizations to help conduct trainings to make sure that officers are more sensitive to these issues and know that, listen, if somebody, if somebody is saying, this is my name, and you're looking at the license and you're like, I'm just gonna put down some other name, that is disrespectful. Right? I think they may think that, oh, well, no, I have to be factually accurate because this is what the license says. And I have to, no, you have to either put a note somewhere in the arrest affidavit or something to indicate that this is the person's preferred name, right? And even though legally this may be the name and you may have to keep that, again, for accuracy, you have to make sure to show respect for who the person is. So it would be partially training. It would be training my own prosecutors so that if they encounter an arrest affidavit where, again, there was dead naming or something like that, they know to ask those questions because, again, you don't know what you don't know. And that is a training that when I was a prosecutor, and to the best of my knowledge in the last 3-4 years, has never occurred. There's been no trainings specifically around transgender concerns. That's something that I aim to change. So that way the prosecutors are more sensitive to these issues and know exactly how to work within, maintaining that respect while making sure that we get to the point of obtaining justice for the person that was victimized.
So if I could just follow up, you would be interested then in developing office forms and reports that not only record the legal name and the gender of the individuals, but also the names and the pronouns that they themselves use and identify with, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So the next question, so this is sort of a two-part question, and part of it is sort of happening in real time with everything that is taking place with regard to police brutality against Black people. And so recently on Tuesday, under first reading, Miami-Dade County Commission considered bringing on a civilian review board. And so the person asking the question wants to hear what you think about a civilian review board and how that would play into your office, one part. But the other one stems from this question that's a two-part question, sort of it builds on it. And it's, will you actually prosecute bad officers? It says that your opponent has refused to prosecute violent officers in South Florida. So that's the editorial comment from that person. But that's the question, that's the frame of it. We'd love to hear from you on that.
Certainly. So I fully, wholeheartedly, and full-throatedly support civilian review panels. I find them to be effective. I find them to be another step in creating trust between communities, especially communities of color, and law enforcement, as well as the criminal justice system. And I find it to be a good measure of accountability if done effectively. So, one of the concerns I have about the current bill that's probably going to be passed by the county commission is that subpoena power, because that was stripped away, and that's something that I know Commissioner Jordan had really advocated for. What it means is that now the Civilian Review Board does not have the ability to subpoena certain witnesses. And to me, that's problematic, because they need to have that power to be able to get all the evidence available and decide whether or not a police officer violated the policies and procedures of the department that they work for. You can't determine that if you only have half the scenario. So I believe in it. I think that we need to really let it do what it can and let it be like be the best it can be, right? Rather than taking what the model is and then like paring it down, so it almost becomes symbolic. That is my fear. I don't want to see a symbolic civilian review board. I want to see one with actual teeth that can do investigations. My intention, once I win, is to work collaboratively with the civilian investigative panel in the city of Miami, as well as whatever form it takes in the county, and be able to maybe do parallel investigations or investigations in conjunction with each other. So that way I can utilize my subpoena power as the state attorney to be able to help bring a conclusion. And if it appears that there's no criminal violation, but there may have been a violation of procedure that could be actionable by the chief of police, then help the Civilian Review Board get to that point and help make that recommendation. And then the last question that was posed is, would I actually prosecute bad officers? Yes. Yes, I will.
Ms. Pearson, you'd mentioned criminal procedure and the criminal process just briefly. Would you consider issuing a statement that gender identity or presentation alone should not be used as reasonable suspicion or as prima facie evidence of a crime?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I know I'm very facially expressive, and I'm just like, why would you want to use that as evidence of a crime? That's you. Like that's discrimination to me. No, that's not okay. So yes, absolutely, I would release a statement on that.
So we've got 8 minutes left, and one of the things I want to start to be able to do is to draw how you differentiate yourself from your opponent. And so I'll start with this one question, which I think is a good place to start, and then we can build on it. But your opponent has been at this for 25 years. How do you defeat a war chest that's been amassed over these years?
So she has been in office for 27 years. And the way to defeat her is, number one, shining a light on failed leadership, right? Because at the end of the day, we have a situation where just this week it was released that another officer was cleared for shooting an unarmed juvenile, age 15, in the back. He said that he was he meant to reach for his taser, but he actually reached for his firearm, which, by the way, if you held both, there's a difference in weight, so you can tell the difference. But be that as it may, this is another example of failed leadership. So just because someone has been in office in 27 years doesn't mean they need to stay in office for another 27. So let's start with that. Secondly, when it comes to the money aspect, right? This was never going to be about me out fundraising her. I never intended to do that. My intention was always to outwork her, period, end of story, because I'm about the grassroots approach. We obviously can't knock on doors, but it's about making that physical contact with different pockets of people all around the county, not just relying on grass tops and relying on elected officials to go out and give the message. No, I want to touch the people. I want to talk to the people that are impacted by the system, the people that go to the ballot box. They need to see me, because it's my name on the ballot, not a surrogate's name. It's my name. Melba Pearson is on the ballot. And I want everyone to know that once I get elected, that's not going to be the last time they see me. I'm not going to just hang out at certain types of events with certain types of people, right? I report to the people being the voters, and I intend to always be visible in a variety of communities so that they know I care, so that they know that I want to hear from them what their concerns are. So I think our leadership styles are very different that way. I'm very hands-on. And also, at heart, I'm a litigator, right? Like, I love trying cases, even though in this role, I may not be able to because of the large administrative nature. You know, it's an office of 1,200 people, and, you know, it's basically one of the largest law firms in the state, right? So it may not allow me time to actually try cases. But the fact that I still have that mind means I'm able to analyze issues very rapidly, and I'm able to provide concrete advice and not just necessarily rely on what somebody else is telling me. I can be like, no, I don't think that's a good approach because I've done it and I know it doesn't work. Or I think we should do it this way because, you know, I've done it and it works this way. So, you know, I think that the key distinction is that 27 years is just too long. Number two, there's been a number of very high profile failings, including the case that I just mentioned, the Officer Neubauer, I believe his name is, the Darren Rainey case, where a man was left to boil to death in a shower and there was no accountability for the officers who left him there. For Jesus Menical, who was sexually assaulting women and girls in Hialeah and didn't receive any accountability. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's about failed leadership, and it's also about touching the community where they are and not being afraid to be with the people.
Sergio.
Ms. Pearson, given your response, what would individuals who have interacted with you as a prosecutor and in your professional experience say about you with your work ethic, and that you think would be useful for our audience and ultimately the voters to know?
So, I can take it from a couple different perspectives. So from the defense attorneys who have worked with me, they will say that I am fair, that I listen, that even though we may not agree, they feel that they were heard, right? And that they had the opportunity to fully present their case and have a robust discussion with me about an issue. So that's something that I think the defense attorneys, you know, many defense attorneys approached me and had actually asked me to run for that very reason, because they're like, we miss having someone like you in the office that we knew we can go to and have a discussion and feel heard. So there's that aspect. From the victims and survivors, the next of kin that I've worked with, many of them are endorsing me. Many of them encouraged me to run, and they're now endorsing me, you know, in this journey. And they will say that I fought like hell for them. And I gave my all, and I left it on the floor for them. So they know that, you know, I'm not going to stop until I can bring them some modicum of closure. I can't bring them complete closure because I can't bring them their loved ones back in the case of a homicide or completely make them whole. But at least I'm going to explain to them what's going to happen every step of the way. I'm going to fight for them in the courtroom, and I'm going to make sure they get the services they need to be able to rebuild their lives. And the defendants that I've dealt with, even though they may not like the sentence they got, they'll say that I treated them professionally, that it was never like personal. I was never nasty with them. And many times I've sat down with them and spoken to them about, okay, this is why, you know, we're going to go the way we're going to go in this case, or this is why I'm offering you X number of years for your sentence. And many times defense attorneys left me alone with their clients because they knew I was going to be a straight shooter. I was going to tell the truth. I wasn't going to try and manipulate them, and that I was going to relate to them on a human level to really make sure that we can get a just end to the situation. So I think everybody that's interacted with me will say that I'm hardworking, I'm straightforward, I'm honest. What you see is what you get. This is me, right? And this is going to be me. You know, I'm gonna evolve. I might get a little grayer, but you know, at the end of the day, this is who I am, and this is not about politics for me. Like, yes, I know it's an elected position, but this is not about politics. This is about justice, and this is something that's a core value of mine that's never going to change.
I was going to ask you for a closing statement, but I think that sort of was it, right? Like, I really think that it was a great way to be able to summarize where you are in your candidacy. So I want to be able to say, you know, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. We've come to the end of the webinar. We really appreciate that you took time out of your night. I want to say thank you also to members of the audience. We appreciate the support that you've given us. This is a really critically important year, and we need people to get out there and vote. So remember that during a year where we're really challenged about our ability to be out and about, make sure that you register to vote by mail. Also, we want people in the public to be part of our endorsement process. So go to the SAVE website, save.lgbt, and sign up to be an endorsement panelist. Become a volunteer. Be part of the whole process of what we do here when we interact with elected officials and we interact with voters. We're going to send this presentation out to everybody that's been part of the evening tonight. We really appreciate it. Stay tuned for our next candidate forum, which is going to be tomorrow with State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle. Our goal ultimately, right, is to get pro-equality candidates elected. Everyone take care. Have a good night. And Melba, Ms. Pearson, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the night, and thanks for having me.
Of course. Good night.
Night.